Go to calling from an 847 area code. Are you there, or is your phone just butt dialed me again?
All right, yes, I am here. My name is Joe. I'm in Wisconsin.
Hey, Joe.
I'm a libertarian to debate you.
I'm sorry?
I'm a libertarian, and I'd like to debate you.
Fantastic. Let's do this. What do
All
you?
right.
Well, what would you like to? Is there a particular issue that you would like to talk about, or what?
Well, I saw a video of you from last December or November on your show, just inviting libertarians to debate. And you were just talking about the utopianism of it, and talking about Somalia.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of wondering if you have any questions for me, frankly.
Yes. How do you believe in such fantastical notions?
Well, I could answer how you invited libertarians to answer how when was the last time the free market existed in the country, and I would argue that it has never existed in anything you could really call a country, because a country has the governmental apparatus is a state, and part of the definition of the state is a monopoly on distributing public goods and services. So I would argue that in no society that has been governed by a single country has any kind of libertarian utopian anarchy ever existed. Right,
I agree totally. So, and yet you think it can exist.
I think it can. I think it doesn't necessarily require the abolition of government per se, or it doesn't require the abolition of governance or any kind of social or economic order of the day, any kind of dynamic social order. But we can still have governance in existence. I just think it has to be acceded to voluntarily. And I would even go a step further than the libertarians who embrace the Constitution by saying that even the Constitution was not put on the American public through consent. It was really drafted by 55 people who had the ability to choose who really, to foist
Right.
this government on the whole populace that didn't have the ability to choose whether to be governed by the British, the Americans, the founders, or anybody else, or themselves.
So you see my point here. I mean, I could say to you, okay, well then, how about this? Everybody can assent to the Constitution and our governance here, and if you don't like it, leave. And you'll tell me, well, there's nowhere for you to go, because then you have to assent to somebody else's governing thing. And this is why I say it's a utopian in a fantasy land. And then what happens is what libertarians say to me, well, they give an example, do you think that world peace is possible? Total peace? And I say probably not. And they go, but you still aspire for that. But the problem is that when you aspire for more freedom, as you talk about, or I'm not sure whatever the term is you use, and I want to put words in your mouth, but as you pursue that, what happens is that knowing that you can never get there, the problem is that all you do is unshackle the restraints that are on these corporate bodies that began to basically enslave us in a more dramatic fashion. And we become enslaved to might makes right, and that's it.
Well, first I would say that, I think all anarchists, whether they're on the left or the right, they are kind of utopian in that they want their own kind of freedom or liberty or whatever, and they want a world that's peaceful and without any crime. And to the extent that that's something that to aspire to, it's not to say it's particularly possible, but it's a goal that should always be trying to be achieved. So,
but when you aspire for more peace or less crime, the journey, even if you don't ever get there, the journey there is not as destructive as the journey to this libertarian utopia. Because the journey to this libertarian utopia, unless you get there, it is a completely binary situation. Because this notion where you do not have government constraining any actors in society means that you will necessarily have those who amass power and then amass even more and more power and exploit everyone else.
I do think that the way some libertarians see this journey into a libertarian utopia could be dangerous, because it could allow for corporate power, and it could allow for the kind of violent chaos that comes between one state and a revolution that brings about another state, because there will be a period in the time where no one is governing, and that
Yeah, and that
like,
period will exist forever because you'll never get to that utopian state. So, I mean, that's my point, is that libertarian, that's fine to have a utopian vision. And if we could just jump to that utopia, which is impossible, not just the existence of that utopia in my estimation, because human beings were always going to organize, and that is just the nature of human beings. But the path, the journey there is actually far more oppressive and exploitative.
Okay, well, you had a question before about how basically if you don't like it, get out. That was kind of Reagan's approach, the vote with your feet thing, where if you live in America, you at least have the opportunity to choose to move if you can afford it. Choose to move to a state whose policies you believe are less oppressive. But since it's hard for poor people who unfortunately are predisposed to committing crime due to their economic circumstances, it's hard for them to choose a government without being able to afford to move. So a way to solve that problem is to simply let the states, encourage the states to offer citizenship to people living in neighboring states. That way you can have a kind of competitive government in every state. And I even
yeah, but then don't you have the same problem all over again? It's just you have 50 of those problems instead of one?
Well, to some extent, we have 50 of those problems now, but I mean, I'm not sure how to answer that, honestly. I mean, at least no one would have any government pushed on them without their consent, and government would kind of be viewed as, or all the services provided by government would be viewed as commerce and be viewed in the context of a market, so there would be competition, and no one would have to disobey the laws based on where they live or where they're walking or where they're driving.
Why is it that much cheaper to move states as it would be to a different country? Why is it cheaper for me?
I'm sorry.
Why is it cheaper for me to move from New York to Arizona than New York to Mexico?
I'm not really talking about about whether it would be cheaper. I'm talking about how there are actually libertarian and socialist anarchy ideas that would allow people to choose who governs them regardless of where they live and without moving. If we have enough expansion of government markets into neighboring markets, into neighboring territorial jurisdictions, then people would eventually eventually be able to choose who governs them without moving and regardless of where they are.
Yeah, I'm just barely following what you're talking about.
Okay, well, I can give you a few terms that you can look up: national personal sovereignty, national personal autonomism, anarchy with a P, agorism, GORISM. Those are all right and left anarchist positions that have suggested this idea I'm talking about, and I think it could be.
Do you think any of this is possible? I mean, do you think any of this is possible? I mean, what you're talking about. I mean, do you think any of this is even remotely possible?
I do, but I don't think any of our politicians, even the most libertarian ones, would be willing to put it into place.
Okay, so do you think any of this is possible? If none of the politicians are going to put this into place, and the poor people you're talking about who can't move out of the country don't have access to a good online access. I mean, do you think any of this is possible? Which do you think is more possible, that you and I will become multimillionaires, or that that this will happen?
I think it's equally possible that we could become rich, or that. I mean, I think it's simply a matter of people who have had this government foisted upon them without their consent, just asserting that rebelling against the state, even as some would call it violently, is really just self-defense. So the ability of people to see, we have to have competition to provide government services, and if people take up the slack that government has left behind, or or just take advantage of the fact that there's a market for some kind of defense agency to compete with the state, then if people could start offering their own services, whether healthcare or anything that government provides, but including self-defense and including common defense and personal property.
Well, what about like Blackwater? What about VJ or whatever they call themselves now? I mean, don't we have private armies? Isn't Medicare Advantage a good example of health care provided by the private? That ended up being more expensive. I mean, and look, all this is fine, but honestly, it's so fantastical that it's not even in the realm of it's not even the realm of politics, because as we go down, like I say, I don't even know this notion that we're going to have perfect competition. It has never existed. What you're talking about has never existed in any time. There's never been a time in human history where you have two competing armies and people somehow in the middle can just decide randomly, like, I'm going to join that army or I'm going to join that army. What more often happens is one of the armies gets there first, decides that we're going to kill off, a certain population. We're going to forcibly draft the others. We're going to rape the women, and we're going to kill the children. That's what's happened.
I wouldn't call anything the Army does voluntary action. I mean,
I'm not talking. I'm talking about private armies or non-governmental armies or whatever. I mean, look, you're living in a world that's not even like Game of Thrones is closer to reality than what you're talking about. And I'm talking throughout history. You can find, I'm sure, tiny pockets of where people are born into societies and then willingly, or just are born into nature, I guess, and then willingly join societies. But they're certainly, even then, they're being coerced by the fact that they can't possibly do anything on their own that could sustain them.
Well, I'm not necessarily talking about armies, but collective self-defense agencies, which even left anarchists have proposed. But I'm also wondering how you can describe Blackwater as a private army. Isn't it funded by taxpayers? Don't they get government contracts?
Well, they get private contracts too. They work for the government is just one of their clients. Blackwater gets money from corporations too. From anybody who's got the money, they'll work for.
Okay. Well, how much less money do you think they would have if they didn't have the government contract, if it was just corporations paying them?
Okay. Significantly, half. I don't know. They'd still exist. Just have a smaller business. You don't think there are private entities that don't get government contracts? They get contracts from other governments. I mean, it's like, I don't know what world you're living in that any of what you're talking about can come about.
In this room, for example, there are no taxes being levied. There are no police officers. I'm living in a libertarian anarchist utopia right now. I think everywhere I go where I don't encounter police or tax agents, I'm living in a libertarian utopia of my own creation.
Okay. And how did you build that? How did you create that drywall on your walls? That this device that you're using to call me on, how did that get developed? Do you have running water where you are?
Pardon?
Do you have running water where you are?
Are you saying there would be no water without the government?
No, I'm asking if in your utopian room there, in your utopian house, do you have running water?
I do.
How did it get there?
And I have a phone, and I have things that I bought with money, and I have things that were it not for the Federal Reserve dollar, I would have bought it with some other currency or through bartering my labor.
Are you listening to the show on the internet?
Sorry?
Are you listening to the show on the internet?
I'm not, but I do have internet.
Okay. Isn't that tainting your libertarian utopian paradise? I mean...
No.
That's the government, dude. The government built that.
Well, the government let me survive, so to be consistent, should I kill myself? I mean, there's no cop in the room aiming at me, so do I owe my existence to the...
No. Don't draw a parallel between the fact that the government built the internet and the government lets you live. That is not a parallel. That is not an analogy.
I'm saying
that is you dealing with the fact that you're not living in a libertarian utopia in that room. You're deluding yourself. You would not be able to communicate with me in that place if it existed. You would not know that I was alive. You would not know that I had made a challenge on YouTube.
And if it were, I can play that card too, though. If it were not for private internet providers and private computer makers,
indeed, and I am not calling for the abolition of private internet companies. I'm not.
And I'm not calling.
But you're saying there should be no government. You're claiming that you're living in a libertarian bubble, and you're not. You're not, sir.
I make rules. I make rules voluntarily that I impose through social order, through social interaction on others.
And you leech off the advantages you get from the government, from the tax dollars, from society, and then you. I mean, this is like you're saying like I am floating in the middle of the sky, and you don't realize you're standing on a building.
I'm not saying that I owe none of. I'm not saying that there's nothing in my life I owe to the existence of society or voluntary association, voluntary interaction, or even government. I'm not even saying that the American government should be abolished. I'm just saying it should allow for competitors, and it should allow to.
It does have competitors. There's a lot of countries around the world.
I'm saying competitors in the same territory.
I see. All right.
Well,
all right. I mean, I don't know. I concede.
Okay.
I appreciate the call.